I was 18, I transferred from a bigger university to a smaller Christian school, and I had my first serious girlfriend well before I met my wife there. And on our third date, it's hard to forget this. This is how powerful I was in apologetics, which again, it's just learning how to give a reason for the hope you have within you, a reason for what you believe, a why, putting a why to it, right? So my girlfriend at the time was my first serious girlfriend, my freshman year in college, right? And we go on our third date, and I'm dropping her off at her dormitory. Had separate dorms, right? It's a Christian school. And I'm dropping her off, and she says before she gets out of the car, says this, you know, I wonder if I wrote a book about myself right now, and I said that all my friends, they agreed that I'm super special, and I, her name was Stephanie, am a god. And I threw it in the ground, and it got buried for a couple hundred years, and then in the future, they were maybe excavating this place for something else and knocking these buildings over, and they found this book. Do you think people would worship me? Now, it was very, very clear to me at that time that she was making an analogy to Jesus. Now, I didn't know what to say. She already knew my testimony, right? What am I supposed to tell her? Well, Jesus means a lot to me. You know, we're at a Christian school. She was raised in a Protestant family in West Virginia. So here's my very, very powerful response. Shut up. Get out of here. Don't be stupid. You're going to miss curfew. So she got back up to her room, and then she called me about 2 hours later and she said, you know what? I asked my dad and my youth pastor and my pastor back in West Virginia at our home church about this, and my pastor said, you better not keep talking that way. You might not be saved. My youth pastor said, I don't know. I mean, maybe they would. Who cares? And she goes, my dad blew it off as well. Apologetics is the business of attempting to try to answer something like that, and we'll get back to that by the end. But I wanted to let you know that that's what this is about. Now, the first thing I want you to understand is this, the difference between knowing and showing. One of the things that is very, very true about your experience with Jesus is you can know him and not know how you know him, right? Because he opens the heart and he takes you from glory to glory. And you can say, I don't know, I just know it's real, right? I know him because I've got him in my heart. And this is one of the things that's very, very cool about our faith tradition. You know, there are people that are live in places in the world that they don't have a Bible. They only have a missionary. And I don't say they have an inauthentic salvation experience. They can still be saved. They may not know how to show they're saved, though. So what's the difference between knowing and showing? Showing is when you try to do evangelism. And as Dusty said, one of the aspects of maturing in Christianity is sharing with people. And when you share, that's where apologetics comes in. Right? It helps you do the Great Commission. It helps you connect and cooperate with God as you try to show somebody. But here's the thing. Even if you didn't have any reasons for the rest of your life, you could still say I authentically know Jesus. Right? There was millennia of time where people didn't know how they got pregnant. They knew something happened, right, on the way to getting pregnant, but they didn't know the ins and outs of pregnancy, but nonetheless they were pregnant. Right? Somebody might know something about a certain chemical that mixes together. They don't know the ins and outs of chemistry, but they know that this chemical mixed with this one gives you this. So you can have an experience where you're experiencing something real and not know it comprehensively, not know it exhaustively. But when it comes to evangelism, it helps to do what's called giving a defense. There's a positive side. What's the positive side? It's giving positive reasons why you're not deluded or fooled, or God isn't just like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. And then there's negative apologetics where you say, okay, the alternatives to what happened to me. If somebody says, well, you were just being worked up, or really you were experiencing Brahman or Buddha, or an angel at the time. You don't even know it. Negative apologetics is where you try to say, well, those alternatives don't really work. So that being said, what are two series of four things we can think about when we're approaching someone, or someone has a really, really deep-seated problem with your faith, thinks you're just nuts? You know, there are people that think just because you come to a Pentecostal church, you're brainwashed, right? Our culture tells you you're just really naive and gullible. There's a false view out there in our culture that says if you believe in Christianity, the really smart people know something you don't know, and if you knew it, you wouldn't believe. And it's just not true. It's not true at all. So I'll try to sustain that for you. But the first thing you need to think about is how to do evangelism, what we call tactically or strategically. So there's about four simple moves to think about, two series of four here to think about, and I'll tell you how to simply do it, and it'd be low risk before we're all said and done. The first is this: trying to determine through questions whether somebody believes truth exists as a category. That's the very first thing. Does truth exist as a category? The next one is, well, if truth exists as a category and there are things that are true and things that are untrue, And that's a big thing to determine because people pretend like they don't think truth matters. They pretend like that all the time. You know how you know they don't really believe it? The minute they get violated or the minute there's something really at risk. Somebody doesn't look at the back of a jar and go, well, truth is whatever I make it up to be, and it says poison on the back, I'm going to eat it anyway. Nobody does that. When somebody has their wallet stolen, all of a sudden, they're very, very clear about what's right or wrong. But the minute they want to give themselves the right to do anything, they become, well, good and evil is whatever you make it. So first is, does truth exist? The second move is God really real? Is God real? Right? Is God a true being, or is it a false thing that humans have worked up? The next one is, does God do any miracles? Does this person believe that God, if God does exist, that he works in the world? And if so, what does he trust as a report, the Bible or a holy book, as a report of God working in the world? And last, are at least the New Testament's reliable documents that we can count on and base our lives on? Right? So 1, is truth exist? 2, is God real? 3, does God do any miracles? And how are we going to determine whether those reports are real or not, or mythological? And last, is at least the New Testament reliable? Is Jesus who he said he is? Those 4 things are crucial, right? And the 4 basic things every religion or life philosophy has to answer, not just Christians. We get pegged with this all the time. Every single life philosophy or religion tries to answer 4 questions. They're really basic. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So you're not the only one that has to have 4 answers to that. Every religion on the planet and life philosophy is supposed to have those 4. So there's a series of 4 questions you want to get straight when you're trying to talk to somebody and walk them through what they believe. And then second, you want to know what their answers are to those 4 things. Origin, how did we get here? Meaning, what do we do while we're here? Morality, how do we do what we do while we're here? And destiny, where are we going individually? What we sang about tonight, about death, Jesus defeating death, awesome. But where are we going collectively as a human race, right? Especially when the sun burns out and everything's gone, right? Or individually, when death does, our time here is over. So those 2 series of 4 are really, really important. And the reason they're important is because it gives you a framework to try to understand where somebody's coming from. I'm going to advocate tonight for you to use questions because Jesus did. Did you know Jesus asked 3 questions for every 1 statement he made? He asked questions all the time. There's a reason for that, and we'll get to it in a second. But let me just give you an easy memory hook for when people actually challenge the idea, does God exist? We don't have time to get into everything tonight. We just don't have time. We're going to try to hit some things in the Q&A. But let me give you an easy acronym here, the word G-O-D. Okay? When somebody challenges, because look, if God's gone, there's nobody to inspire the Bible. There's no heaven. There's no hell, right? If God doesn't exist, this whole thing is just wishful thinking, right? And we're people to be pitied the most, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. But God, G-O-D, is a good acronym to remember when you're trying to walk through somebody asking, why in the world would you believe in this invisible being? The easiest answer to why you believe in God, the easiest answer, besides the testimony of what he's done in your heart, that's not a bad reason. But when somebody asks for something that they can hold on to, you can remember the G-O-D acronym. The basic answer is this, and I'll give you G and O and D in just a second, but here's the basic answer. God makes the best sense of the reality we experience. Even though he's invisible, God makes the best sense of everything we experience from birth to death in this world. And 3 ways you can see this quite clearly is G for goodness. God, G, goodness. Why? There are a ton of people that are very, very bright that have converted to belief in God and then a belief in Christianity when they compared and contrasted all the God beliefs on the planet. And it's because God makes the best sense of what we call good and evil. If you want to have a way of telling someone this is a right way to live or a wrong way to live, you have to have something that's beyond your opinion. God is the being that makes best sense of you having rights. Have you ever wondered about that? About rights? When you say, I've got a right to this, right to that, who gave you those? If you say God gave them to you, they shouldn't be violated by other human beings. If you say a group of people, like a government gave it to you, they can take those away anytime they want. When you say it's wrong to be this or that, to be a person that violates other people and takes their freedom away, why? Right, especially if your origin story includes a Darwinistic scenario, right? The entire history of the animal evolving race is one animal dominating another for their goods and devouring them. So when you say it's wrong to do that to especially somebody who's vulnerable, what are you saying? So goodness, G, God makes best sense of what we mean when we say, I think this is good and evil, right and wrong, and it's more than my opinion. Because you need a God literally, that it exists above human beings and has consequences beyond death for human beings to make sense of why you should do what you do and why you have a strong conviction about morality. There are many, again, there are reams of books that have been written on this subject, and many atheists have converted over this. They want to have a strong position. I'll give you an example. One of the most famous anti-Christian evangelism books is called The God Delusion. It was written back in the early 2000s by an retired Oxford biologist named Richard Dawkins. And in his book, he had 3 chapters on how bad Christians have been through history. But then in chapter 4, he says this, well, I don't really believe there's a good or an evil because I don't believe in a God. There's no God. And it's like, well, then how are you telling Christians they're being bad people in the first 3 chapters if there's no good or evil, right or wrong? He said there's just DNA, and we dance to its music. You don't have a free will, and you don't have any right or wrong, and there's no heaven or hell. So the goodness is the G. O is origin. O is origin. Origin is basically saying, okay, does God make the best sense of where the universe came from? I don't know if you know this, the universe looks a lot like an effect. And every time we encounter an effect, we need an adequate cause for this sort of thing. So in everything in your life, when you encounter an effect, you look for an adequate cause. If you hear a sound and somebody says nothing made that sound, you don't believe it because the sound's an effect. So what happens when you see the entire universe and it's changing through time? Well, God makes best sense of that. Little bangs, right? Little bangs need a person that banged it, right? Big bangs need starters or beginners, right? So God makes best sense of some being called a spirit being that exists outside of space and time, that has the power and the intelligence and the care to cause the universe to come into being. Origin. This is all the available scientific evidence today, all of it points towards some powerful being that chooses to start something called the universe. So origin is O. And then D, guys, is the most powerful series of arguments for God's existence admitted by skeptics. I don't know if you know this term, but in the academic world, there's a term called when an enemy attests or something, or when an enemy or somebody you don't like admits something about you. That might mean it has a higher chance of being correct. You know why? They don't want to admit it about you. There are more enemies of Christianity that think you're nuts for being in here that will go, yeah, but the design argument is, let's not talk about it. There are more atheists that admit the design arguments keep them up at night than any other series of arguments. It's just, the easiest way to put it is this way. If you go out today and you see a small ditch and you know it's rained a lot, right? There's been rain, wind, erosion, and sunshine out there, and you see a pebble, you think, well, okay, the forces of nature could make that. But if you look in the next ditch and you see an iPhone, there's no one in here that thinks those forces made that iPhone. Well, there are things that humans couldn't have created that we enjoy, both on this planet and off it, that make for the existence of life and matter even possible, that are far more complex than a cell phone or a laptop. They exceed anything any collection of humans have ever made. So when we see that, give you an example, at the heart of the cell, the very basic unit of who you are, your cells, right? DNA is there. They call DNA a code. Whenever we encounter a code, there's always a coder. Anytime in life. Whenever we encounter programming, there's a programmer. Whenever we encounter anything that looks like it required intention, design, purpose, and interaction, we say, that just doesn't happen on its own. I don't just come across even something like a speaker and say, well, if you give enough time, it'll just kind of fall into this position. Right, where all these parts come together and give you something other than the parts can give you on their own. So God, goodness, ethics, morality. O, origin. D, design. Design arguments are some of the most powerful in existence. So there are probably people in here that say, well, you're a pastor. Of course you'd say that. But like Dusty reminded you, also remember, I am a professional scholar. I'm not currently a professor at a university, but I have been before. And I've done quite a bit of campus ministry where I would love talking with really intelligent people that think I'm nuts, okay? And they'll admit over and over again that, okay, they're not all bogus arguments. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, one of my mentors is arguably one of the top 3 brightest Christians living on the planet. His name was William Lane Craig. And it's not like he's dead. He's not dead. But William Lane Craig is still living. He lives in a little north of Atlanta. He has put arguments like this in front of other doctorate holder professors at universities in front of thousands of people. He's had 68 debates over the last 25 years. He hasn't lost one. Not one. And that's even with atheists judging him. Okay? He's tied 2, and he's won 66 of them. And he's not looking for a TikTok pastor or some sort of, he's saying only the best and brightest from your group, from your non-believing group. Only the best and brightest. And he handles them over and over and over again. You don't hear about this stuff because we have a media, that means TV, radio, and internet, that is dead set on making you feel stupid for what you believe. If you don't understand that, you're not seeing the world the way you should. I've sat across from profs that say, yeah, I know I'm supposed to teach sociology, but I really think what's wrong with the world are you Christians. So I will do everything in my power in every single session as they try to get an A in my class to break that thing their parents gave them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get in the Q&A about what university life should look like when you graduate and that sort of thing. But let me give you one last thing. Another thing that drives me crazy that you guys encounter all the time is this weird online world where Christians are kind of stupid and they put up a scripture and all the other smart people are like Silicon Valley and the skeptics are really smart and snarky and smug. And they act like that you've got to be gullible, naive, and stupid to be a Christian. So I want to give you a couple of people that have come to Christianity because it's the best evidenced religion out there. Their faith and their internal experience, God's in my heart, matches the evidence best. And they're best known for evaluating evidence. Listen to this list of current living Christians, these idiots and rubes, right? Listen to this. Physicist Dr. William Phipps, Nobel Prize winner, went to MIT. Physicist Dr. Don Page, Cambridge. Particle physicist Dr. Peter Busey, also at Cambridge. Law expert Dr. Robert P. George, Oxford and Harvard. Physicist Dr. Christopher Isham, Imperial College of London. He's a Dirac Medal winner. They only give one of those away every 50 years, and he got it in science. Quantum physicist Dr. John Polkinghorne at Cambridge, and cosmologist Dr. George Ellis, Cambridge University. People say about George Ellis, he's the smartest living man in the 21st century. He loves Jesus. He is a Bible-thumping believer. He loves God. So, last two. Well, I'll just do one more. Dr. Alan Sanders is one of my favorites. He was arguably the brightest scientist in the 20th century, the 1900s. Sandage said, listen, I can't be an agnostic anymore. There's just too much evidence for a higher power that I see outside of the planet and inside of the planet. Like Paul says in Romans 1, right? He says, from the foundation, the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities have been what? Clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that men and women are without excuse. That means when you get to judgment, you don't get to say, not enough evidence. God says, what did you do with the available evidence? It wasn't just, and that's why, and your testimony is part of that. Your testimony, your changed life is a part of that. It's a powerful part of that. But we haven't been left without anything else to talk about. In 1 Peter 3:15, it says this. Peter, the chief apostle, the chief disciple after Jesus ascends that leads the Christian church into the future and all the persecution and all the highs and the lows, the peaks and the valleys. Peter says this in 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the hope you have within you, but do so with gentleness and respect. He says, be careful about how you do it. You don't want to beat somebody over the head with this stuff. And I think it's interesting, too. He says, when someone asks you, you need to be ready to give a reason for the hope you have within you, right? And I would say, hey, do it. Have your testimony on the back end rather than the front end, because this can really be important. Paul was arguably the greatest evangelist ever after Jesus. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10:5 this. Listen to this. He says, part of the Christian life is understanding there's a spirit world that's warring against you. You're not on your own. You've got Holy Spirit power to help you. You've got God that put his image in people so that there is a connection. There's like a desire for God to be. You have to suppress that desire. That's what Paul says in Romans. But what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10:5 is he says this. Whenever you encounter an idea that will take you away from your devotion for God, you need to identify it and pull it down. It will build up a stronghold of doubt in your mind. He says, look, even if you get a pre-idea, a pretense of an idea, you tear it down like a siege on a wall in an ancient world. You pull that stuff down because there are ideas that if you let them go to seed, they will flourish into doubt and then what we call a kind of deconstruction of Christianity and apostasy where you turn. So I wanted to make sure to bring that to you and talk a little bit about these two things very, very quickly. There are two types of ways God communicates with humans. One type is called general revelation. General revelation. This is revelation, God revealing himself to everybody on the planet. Everybody gets this. Everybody. This would be the idea that, there's something special about human beings and something special about the living order. That's the moral law. You kind of get that even if you're born in a place where there's no Bibles and no missionaries. If you look around at reality, you're like, okay, we can all investigate a tree or a wall or a stone or something like this or water. The natural created order is also revealing something to you about God. General revelation answers this question. Is God real? Is he real? Is God, well, okay, we can look at the moral law, G, goodness. We can look at order or the origination of the universe. Okay, we can look at the results of this beginning point and see if we can get to God. And then 3, we can look at design, right? And then the other way he reveals is in what's called special revelation, answer to prayer. You have a specific prayer answered, a miracle in your life, the Bible. These are things that people aren't born with. Some don't ever see a Bible. Some don't ever get a missionary. We'll talk about the fate of the unevangelized at some other point. But right now, know this. There's general revelation and special revelation, right? General revelation, they're truths clear to everybody that should lead you to think there's a higher power. And indeed, most of the human race has come to believe there's a higher power out there. That it's more logical to think there's a higher power or higher powers than not. Special revelation answers these 2 questions. That's the Bible, your experience with God, your experience with the Holy Spirit. Special revelation answers these 2 questions. Which God are we talking about? There's a lot of different conceptions of God. And what does he, she, it, or they require of me? What do they require of me? So those questions, all 3 of them are connected. General revelation, is there a God? Answer, yes. Is there a higher power, though invisible, that makes best sense of the reality as we experience? Yes. And then the second phase is the biblical data. It says what? The biblical data says, okay, if there is a general revelation, special revelation tells us which God are we talking about, and is there anything he or she or it or they want me to do? If you look that way, apologetics is trying to link general revelation to the Bible and special revelation and your prayer experience. It's trying to link these together to bring somebody who kind of has those truths of general revelation, maybe not, and they haven't really come to God and they don't know Jesus, and push those things together. Now, how do we do this? Very, very quickly. The best way, again, as I can tell you, is to ask questions. It's really, really, really important. Jesus did it. It sets the tone for the conversation. It is it's something where you can decide when to begin and end it. You can actually decide, what you ask, and questions are really, really, really important. I won't give you some of the greatest interviewers of all time that people pay to listen to their interviews for years and years and years are just great at asking really, really good questions. So 2 questions that make evangelism easier, because there's a comedian named Jim Gaffigan that said, is there anything more uncomfortable than somebody coming up and saying, can I talk to you about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? Now, I think you should be willing to put your coolness and your social life, on the altar of for Jesus. But it is uncomfortable because we live in a culture that makes it really uncomfortable to talk about that. Jesus is really uncomfortable, all right? Maybe we can talk about God as a spirit, but not. So there's 2 questions that are really easy ways to get the God conversation going. And the first is this: what did you mean by that? So somebody leaves and you say, in there all you were doing is you were faking it. What do you mean by faking it in there? I didn't feel like I was faking it when I was worshiping God. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by there's no God and reality is what it is? What do you mean by reality? Do you mean just everything on the planet, off the planet? Asking what they mean by that is a great question. Why? Because you want to know where they're coming from. And the second question is like it. It says, what reasons do you have to believe that? Do you have any good reasons to believe that? Now, here's the thing. You have to be ready for 2 things, right? Here's the first, that they can come back and ask you the same thing. What do you mean by that? And why do you believe that? And remember, what does Peter say? Always be ready to everyone to give an answer for the hope you have within you. And then 2, remember this. Most people, when it comes to religious ideas, because of the culture we live in, treat it like it's a slogan. They have slogans. There's nothing behind it. You can sometimes be really disappointed. They'll think that Christians are intolerant, or the Bible's pro-slavery, or evolution dismisses a creator, science has disproven miracles. These are slogans. There's no real reasons behind it. None. So I wanted to bring those 2 to you and just say, hey, this is a great way, a real tactical way to kind of follow up and talk to somebody about what they believe and gather information with regard to asking questions. And then you might be able to earn the right to talk about what you believe, why you believe it, and what reasons you have for believing it. Last but not least, Christianity, again, you are living in an age where there is more evidence, training resources, and opportunities for evangelism than I would say, and this is a bold claim, in the entire 2,000-year history of Christianity. There is more opportunity to share, more resources for training, and just more evangelism opportunities and resources than ever. It's almost overwhelming. There are specialists now online that go over individual categories of skeptical attacks on Christianity. So I just wanted to encourage you.